The first thing I want to talk about is data from our upcoming State of Sales Development report, as well as there's a recent Gartner community survey, and it's all showing the same thing, which is really great to see that sales leaders expect to increase SDR headcount in 2025. What traits should they be looking for in a sales development prospect in 2025?
At the helm of a sales tech company, oftentimes when people are coming to me for advice, they want to know about the tech. What tool should I buy? What's the latest in AI? And always the first thing I go to is, what is your training like? What is your recruitment process like? Because regardless of what technology you use, having the right person in the chair, having the right sales rep under you is the thing that's going to be the biggest impact on performance. So I think that for an SDR manager, the majority of their time, the majority of what they should be worrying about or thinking about is, how do I get the very best talent on my team? So I think that comes down to a few different things. I think you have a framework at Orum, which is good enough, world class, and best ever. And that's how we kind of clarify the bar that we have internally. And that came from a manager that I had at my previous company, where I went to him and I said, hey, I'm going to hire a world-class SDR team. And he was like, well, why would you want to do that? That just means that you have a team just like other companies. Don't you want to build the best ever SDR team? And I think that's really powerful because it clarifies where the bar actually should be. And if you shoot for the stars, you hit the moon. And if you go for best ever, are they better than anyone in the building right now? Then if you're lucky, maybe you will have a world-class team, at least, if not best ever. So I think one of the things is making sure that you have a wide enough net and that you're interviewing enough people. And you can accomplish this through your own network, internal recruiters, external recruiters. Because at the end of the day, especially when you're hiring entry-level talent, you're going to have to go through a lot of people to get the right characteristics and get the right talent on board. So if you only have a couple interviews, you start to rationalize to yourself, well, I've only talked to 3 people. I think this is the best person of these 3 people, so maybe they're the right fit for the job. And that's not really going to get you to the type of talent that you want. You're trying to uncover the future best ever sales reps in the world that might be in their first job or second sales job or very early on in their career. And that's the way to think about it is, that's a rare individual. That's not someone that's going to come across your desk very often. So I think that in some ways you have to be judgmental, you have to be critical, because most people are not going to end up being the best ever. Most people are not going to end up being great sales reps. So you really have to be very, very picky. And I think the other thing too is there's always a lot of pressure on an SDR manager or sales manager to hire and to fill that seat, because you need to hit quota. You need to, the way it's worked out on a spreadsheet is, this is how many sales reps I need for X amount of meetings if they're carrying Y quota. But the reality is, it's much better to hire someone late than rush and hire the wrong person. So that's kind of my initial thoughts when I think about recruiting.
Is there, there's that like old adage when you're thinking about hiring there's sales representatives in general. It'd be like, if you're just like hand someone a pencil, and it's like the Mad Men thing where it's like, sell me this pencil or sell me this pen. Like with the sales, like with the process with hiring sales development people, you only get such a small amount of time with each candidate. Are there questions or topics that you think of as important when you're interviewing these different candidates to get at least a sense of if they can be a part of that best ever sales team?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that there's a subtle art to the interview process, especially when you're looking at entry-level or semi-entry-level talent. When you're hiring a more experienced account executive, it's really easy to look at their track record, call people who worked with them in the past. But when you have someone and you're sort of guessing or hoping that they're going to become this great sales rep in your organization for the first time, you have to pick up and find other cues. So very similar to a discovery call, the first thing I want to think about is, how do I get them to talk? Because the more that they talk, the more I can understand where they're coming from, what they're about, what their motivation is to do this job. And typically the way that I start off the call is, I'll say, hey, love to learn more about you. Love to have you walk through sort of your life story, like where you grew up, where you went to school, your work experience, and then see how well that they paint that narrative. Did they have storytelling skills? Are they the victim of this life story? Are they someone that hits obstacles and consistently overcomes those obstacles, whatever they might be? And I'll tend to build on that and dig in from there. Another really key question that I ask almost every person that I interview, especially for an SDR position, is, can you give me an example of a time that you did something really, really hard in the past where you came out on top or as number one? And typically the really good candidates will have amazing stories around that. There was one candidate that comes to mind in particular. He wanted to become a race car driver, and his parents wouldn't let him. So he went around when he was like 16, raising to like build up the funds to become a race car driver. And then he ended up winning this championship. And like, there's yet a few other stories like that, where whenever he hits an obstacle, he'll hustle, he'll overcome those challenges and make it happen. And I think people that do well in sales, they're highly competitive, very driven. They have that. They have the ability to be a storyteller. They think of themselves as the hero within their own narrative, and so those are some of the things that I'm looking for. And I think some candidates too. It can be a little bit trickier. I think one candidate that comes to mind, who within our own company, he actually famously sort of failed the original phone screen with someone else in my organization. He did sort of mediocre with me, but then we decided, there might be something there, let's get him in person. And once he was in person, he was actually amazing. And it turns out that he had just more of like a soft-spoken type of style. But now that he's an enterprise sales director, we hear from every single client, like, we really, really trust this person. This person is incredibly consultative. So I think with him, at the end of the day, he had other things about him that showed that he had a ton of drive, and he was also really, really, really smart and was able to figure things out. So not every sales rep that comes to you is going to have this sort of boisterous, outgoing type of attitude. There's sales reps that find different things that work for them, but I think the common thing is, have they done something that's really challenging? Have they overcome that? Are they someone that's highly driven, and is there evidence of that when they talk about their life, even if they're 22 and just out of college?
We've seen in 2023, there was a great deal of SDR turnover, and it was when the SDRs were leaving their organization for whether it was by choice or because they just weren't hitting their numbers. This year we saw that the overwhelming majority of SDR quote-unquote turnover is they're staying at the company, they're just going into different roles, whether it's becoming an AE or going to customer success or just taking on a different role entirely. Are there things that you think people should be focusing on when they're interviewing potential SDR, with the thought of down the line they are going to be something else at this company? Like, are there ways that you can sort of set it up where okay, I feel good that these people are going to be here for the long haul, or is that just kind of, you can't really do that until they're at the organization and you see where their skills may lie?
So I actually have some strong opinions on this, and I've had SDRs that work for me that go into all different parts of the organization, whether it's marketing, customer success, sales engineering, and I'm really proud of them, and I think that that's an awesome thing, because in many ways, like, the SDR team is sort of a feeder organization for the rest of the company to develop talent, and especially larger companies. You think of Oracle, they're really known for this, of having a system that takes people out of college and then trains them up and then have them seep through the rest of the organization. All of that being said, when you interview an SDR, the main intention there should be that I want this job because I want to become a great salesperson. If it turns out later that they get recruited into another part of an org and another leader there sees the talent in them and they want to pursue that, great. But I do think that it is not a good idea to hire an SDR with the idea that they're using this as a jump off to go into another part of the org. And I say that because the job is just too hard. You have to want to master your craft in sales. You have to be money motivated. You have to be driven to become hopefully an account executive or sales development manager or something along that vein. Connected to that, one of the rules we've implemented in our own organization is we don't hire an SDR unless they have interviewed with someone in the sales organization that would be potentially responsible for their next step in the organization. So when you don't do that, you have this dynamic where an SDR manager hires an SDR. After a year or two, they don't get promoted within the organization. That's always going to happen in every organization. Not everyone is going to make it or is cut out for sales in the first place, but the sales director or the person managing the field sales team or account executive team is like, look, like, they don't have any attachment towards that person. They're not sponsoring them in any way. They never put their fingerprints on the actual hire. So my feeling is if someone comes into the SDR organization, they have to have, in some sense, be sponsored in a way by the people whose organization they're eventually going to go into. And that's one of the tough things about being an SDR manager is you might have a couple promotions within your org that you can give an SDR, but ultimately they're working in your organization so they can hopefully leave your organization and go somewhere else in the company. And I think that's an unspoken, very tough dynamic. And it's I think an underrated thing is it's very important for the SDR manager to be partnered with the leaders in the field. And that's how you really build that ascension path. Not everyone is going to get into those roles. Like, it's competitive. Everyone wants those high-paying jobs. But I think if you want to set up a good ascension program, I think that's a key component of it, is that partnership and that sponsorship by the head of sales, by the people that are managing the teams in the field.
How quickly should sales leaders be considering those career paths / development for those SDRs? Like, is it, okay, you get them onboarded and then it really does, like, you start to look ahead 9, 12, 18 months? Because obviously it's going to be different. I know we have a seller here who became an AE in like 8 months, and we have others who are in the SDR role and they're successful and they like what they're doing. Like, how quickly should leaders be thinking about those career paths for their SDRs?
Good question. And I think I'm a little bit old school in the sense I think it really depends. Like, it's some combination, like whenever you get promoted, of like, does the company need you to fill this role and are you ready for the role? And I think when those two crossroads meet, like, that's the right time. I would say for most SDRs that should be between 1 to 2 years. If it happens much sooner, like, I'm completely happy with that. If it takes longer than that, especially in some organizations, for example, the one that I came from before Orum, the minimum deal size was 250, 300K. It's really hard to take a 22-year-old and then in 7, 8, 9, 10 months, get them to the point where they can build channel relationships, where they can sell at that level. And so, but if you're a company that's selling an SMB product, like, you might be able to turn them into a transactional salesperson very, very quickly. One of the really interesting things we did at the last company that I worked at, and this is credit to my boss at the time who came up with this, is have do like a discovery demo presentation to the leadership in the field, like after they'd been there for like 9 or 12 months. The problem with that, and what we actually changed, was we started doing it like the first month they were there. So you'd get hired, and then in a month we would say, all right, like, you're going to it's basically like running a first call. You're going to do a discovery demo for the leaders in the field, maybe the head of sales, someone else really, really important. And what happens is that first month on the job, they're studying like it's a final exam because they want to look good in front of those people. So effectively, they're self-training themselves. And one of two things happen. Either in that first month or two, when they do that, they absolutely crush it, and then the field sales leader is trying to pluck them off your team almost immediately. Or they bomb, in which case they're not coming to the SDR manager wondering why they're not an AE. They know what they have to work on. They know that they have skills to build, so it can be like a humbling experience as well. So they get a lot better at their job by doing that training. It forces them to listen to AE calls, and that's going to help them in the short form when they're on SDR cold calls, things like that. But it also is, it's a way for them to demonstrate their skills and kind of understand where they sit in terms of the promotional path. So I'm a big fan of doing that early, like creating opportunities for them to be seen. And I've had situations where I've hired an SDR and they're just so talented. I mean, I can't even keep them on my team. Like the managers in the field want them almost immediately, which can be frustrating for the SDR manager because you have a number to hit. Like, you're always losing your best people, right? But I think that is, at the end of the day, you're going to have much higher performance if you're losing your best people, because that's what drives everyone else to want to knock it out of the park.